Welcome to the launch of the Climate Mayors National Dialogue on a Green and Equitable Recovery. This is the first of 5 events that will take place over the coming months, highlighting the climate leadership of cities. Today's conversation will focus on the Southeast. I'm Tom O'Hara. I'm the editor of the Invading Sea, which is a collaborative of 26 Florida media organizations focusing on the climate crisis. Climate Mayors is a network of 461 mayors from across the country who are committed to taking meaningful and ambitious action to address climate change in their communities and to uphold the goals of the Paris Agreement. Climate Mayors are tackling critical problems, but also seizing opportunities to drive a just, equitable, and sustainable economic recovery that is more resilient to future shocks. Cities are leading the way to help America move away from dependence on fossil fuel and create new industries that will provide dependable power and good-paying jobs without damaging the environment. When we start to emerge from the COVID-19 crisis, we must think about how we rebuild an economy that truly works for everybody. Today, we have 4 panelists who are on the cutting edge of climate leadership. First is Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer, who's a member of the Climate Mayors Steering Committee. We have Stephen Benjamin. Yeah, raise your hand, wave at the people. There we go. Okay, Stephen Benjamin, Mayor of Columbia, South Carolina. Francis Suarez, Mayor of Miami, Florida. Kathy Castor, a member of the US House of Representatives from Tampa area and chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So let's get started with some questions. First, Mayor Dyer, you're first up. While coping with the COVID-19 and resulting economic downturn, what climate actions are you prioritizing as they relate to transportation and the built environment? And where do you see the need for federal government support?
Thank you, Tom, and I want to thank the Climate Mayors for organizing this series, and it's kind of Florida-centric here. And do you feel a little out of place, Mayor Benjamin?
I feel like a Yankee, actually. Like I'm way north of you guys. It's really odd, yeah.
Well, we're kind of in Florida on the forefront of climate change issues, especially down in Miami. We launched our sustainability program about 15 years ago. It's called GreenWorks Orlando. And one of the reasons that we prioritize sustainability and climate action is, as mayors know, we're all competing with talent from across the country, and the cities that are going to be successful in the future are those that can attract the talent to their community. And largely those smart young kids that are going to make it successful value the environment, value cities that promote sustainability and green actions. So we look at the green economic development, job creation opportunities as a result of doing the right thing. So it's coupled together. You know what the fastest growing job in Florida is right now? Solar panel installer, #1 for the last couple of years. And we're still in single digits in terms of the amount of power that's generated by solar. So you can imagine the possibilities to scale those jobs in our communities. So to get right at your question, where we're prioritizing programs is energy efficiency and reducing energy usage in homes and workplaces. Advancing clean renewable energy supply like rooftop solar and battery storage, electrifying our fleets and our buses, and one that's not on everybody's list but we feel like is important is keeping food waste out of our landfills. So we have a zero waste future goal as part of our priorities. We recently prioritized and funded the SELF program to help lower income communities address their energy burdens. One of the cool things we've done, we created a land trust in a historically African-American neighborhood and bought up 82 of what had been slum rental homes. And between our power company, OUC, and the city, we paid for the renovation and upgrading and energy efficiency things for those homes and kept those tenants in those homes and reduced their energy consumption. Just a couple other things, and I'll let you ask somebody else take it over, but we're really into solar projects on city buildings and community solar farms as well. And every time I fly in and out of Denver, I see all those solar panels out there, and it makes me so jealous. So what we're going to do in conjunction with the airport and OUC, we're going to create a floating solar demonstration project at our airport. So you've all flown in and heard the mayor's voice on the tram, right? I'll be pointing out that there are floating solar arrays under your tram as you're coming from your airside to the land side out at the airport. And then the last thing is we are currently, we have a limo system in our downtown area that's a free bus system. So we have 8 new electric buses that are coming online, and we put in another 100 electric charging stations. So those are a few of the things that we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Benjamin, you're next. As your city confronts climate change and seeks to build a better policies and programs you've been focused on that address job creation, social justice, and a healthy environment?
Sure. I tell you, we're all, Francis and Buddy and I, just as leaders in the Conference of Mayors, we're dialoguing more regularly than, and we always talk a lot, but we're dialoguing more regularly now as we deal with a pandemic of 1918 proportions, probably the greatest economic disruption in election year since 1932, and the greatest social unrest since 1968, all wrapped up into a few different months in 2020. And it's against the backdrop of what we're talking about here today, that we're still facing probably the greatest existential threat to humanity, maybe second to nuclear war in climate change. And that's why I want to make sure I cleared my calendar to be available for you all here. Congresswoman, really want to thank you for your leadership in this space, especially as we look for leadership from Washington. It's not coming from 1600 Pennsylvania. It's so important that we have the legislative branch fully engaged in this dialogue. We have been leading from the front here in Columbia, trying to do some things that people may not expect from a southern city in the United States. We don't count Florida necessarily as the South all the time, y'all, so I'll just let you know here in what some might be considered a blueberry and tomato soup. We've been investing heavily in infrastructure, over $500 million in infrastructure, making sure that we protect our rivers and give people clean water here. We invested just 2 years ago in the very first standalone stormwater green bond certified by the Climate Bond Initiative here. A small issue, about $40 million. We're the first city in South Carolina to power all of our city council meetings on clean and renewable energy, the small things that matter. And obviously we're leading along with so many other mayors. I want to say thank you to Eric Garcetti in his absence for his leadership with the climate mayors, but also we're ready for 100 along with the Sierra Club and others, hundreds of mayors who have committed to powering our cities with clean and renewable energy. We made that pledge here in Columbia, and we plan to reach that goal by 2036. Excited about the leadership of the Biden campaign, just rolled out in the last week or two. And we look forward to partnering arm in arm. But we think sometimes you get baby steps. Occasionally you get a chance to take a major leap. Some that Buddy just laid out. We're going to finally roll out our first large and significant solar farm. I'll make sure I have the wattage. I don't have it in front of me right now, but that's set to go live sometime in the next several months. So lots happening here. We just believe that you got to keep leading from the front. And as we continue to manage all these other concurrent crises, oftentimes now being led by those of us on the municipal level, leading large metropolitan areas, we can't take our eyes off the prize, the existential threat that is climate change, and we're not going to do that.
All right, thank you very much. Mayor Suarez, given the infrastructure needs of Miami as a city on the front lines of climate change, what are the city's plans to maintain a vibrant economy while managing sea level rise?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the climate mayors. I want to thank my good friend Mayor Dyer and my good friend Mayor Benjamin. Mayor Benjamin, and obviously Honorable Representative Castor, thank you so much for being with us. Mayor Benjamin, when he was the president of the US Conference of Mayors, was kind enough to give me a very special committee, which was to chair the Environment Committee for the US Conference of Mayors. And by and through the work on that committee, we established the fact that we have a national climate emergency. That was a public policy that we established in that committee. And it's thanks to his leadership that I had the opportunity to bring that to the mayors of the United States and really contextualize this problem nationally. As for the city of Miami, we not only declared a national state of climate emergency, but we also declared one locally. And we did that also, and we didn't just declare it. We also followed it up with action, which is the fact that we passed a bond, which was a $400 million resiliency bond, one of the first of its kind in the United States, called Miami Forever. And the idea behind the bond is that we want to make sure that Miami's here for my children and my unborn grandchildren. Make sure that Miami's here for the future. And with the threat of sea level rise, of hurricanes, of what we call dry day flooding or king tide flooding, and more usual than annual rainfall, we have a series of threats in our city that can threaten, as Mayor Benjamin said, existentially, our existence and push us basically out of our homes. And so what we've done is we've dedicated $200 million of that $400 million bond to resiliency projects, to urban reservoirs, to backflow preventers, to pump stations, and a variety of other different techniques to make sure that our city can manage any kind of a hurricane, any kind of a weather event, and of course, the impending sea level rise crisis that threatens our viability. So that's a program that we are beginning now. It's something that has caught the attention of some global organizations like the Global Commission on Adaptation, which asked me to be a member, and now has asked me to be on their global council. An organization started by former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgina, who was at the time with the World Bank and now with the IMF. So we are creating a variety of different adaptability platforms that we are exporting worldwide and trying to lead on that issue worldwide. Understanding that, COVID has created bandwidth problems for every single city in America. Because we now are so focused on particularly Miami, which is sort of one of the epicenters. We're focused on coming out of this COVID crisis. One of the ways that we want to do it is by implementing that bond and making sure that that $200 million gets to work immediately, so that it not only gets us the resilience work that we need, but it also jumpstarts our economy. So that's where we see a tie between getting that those public funds, actually solving the problems of climate in our community, but also acting as an economic stimulus.
Thank you. All right, Representative Castor. The Select Committee has recently released its report, Solving the Climate Crisis. Can you highlight some of the key priorities captured in the report and discuss how its recommendations should be put into practice, especially in light of what you've heard from the mayors here?
Well, thank you, Tom, and I'm honored to participate with a number of our local mayors who are doing everything they can to keep our neighbors safe, whether it's COVID or the impacts of climate. So thank you very much. Yes, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis at the end of June rolled out our very comprehensive climate action plan for the Congress. It is comprehensive, it's ambitious, it cuts across all sectors of the economy. So our targets are ambitious. They're based upon what science says we need to do, and we don't have time to waste. What we recommend is that we've got to get going on moving to the 100% clean energy economy as quickly as possible. The IPCC has said no later than 2050. So here we are in 2020. We better get our act together. We've been fortunate that local communities have been in the lead on this. What's been missing is a strong federal partner. So we know we need to rectify that. Our priorities also are protecting American families and creating good paying jobs. As Mayor Dyer pointed out, these are good paying, family sustaining jobs. They're growing already, but where could we go if the federal government is a substantive partner? We think we can, this will come at a very important time when the COVID pandemic has millions of Americans who have lost their jobs. So we identify jobs not just in clean energy, but in resilience, in helping our local communities become more resilient to the impacts of climate, whether that's in their drinking water or wastewater or food systems. We propose a new Civilian Conservation Corps and Resiliency Corps that can help partner with local communities. And as we build this clean energy economy, we need to do it right. Because for too long, communities of color and other frontline communities have really borne the burden. They've suffered a disproportionate impact of pollution, and we propose to rectify that. Where we're talking about federal investments, we want to start in those neighborhoods that have too often carried the load and have been discriminated against. Another big priority is keeping families safe, applying the lessons of this ongoing pandemic. We want to help Americans prepare for the health effects of the climate crisis. I don't have to tell you all, it's hot out there. These summers are hotter, they're longer. The air is not quite as clean, and all of this is going to have a disproportionate impact on a lot of vulnerable folks. So we propose to ensure that our hospitals are prepared to withstand climate impacts. We know we have to secure supply chains for medicine and equipment. We have to do a better job of gathering data on health impacts, and we've got to help our local communities and states develop response plans to climate health emergencies. We also call on Congress to ensure that cities have the risk information, the technical assistance, and financial resources they need to adapt to to the climate impact. So we're proposing a new national climate adaptation program. And fortunately, a lot of the leaders here today, they've been on it, but there are a lot of communities across America, and rural America, in small towns that don't have planners or sustainability officers. They need help. So we propose to direct resources and technical assistance to help lift them up. We also call on Congress to help cities with infrastructure, especially transportation, drinking water, wastewater, flood control, to ensure that Orlando, Miami, Columbia can withstand greater floods and other climate impacts. We call on Congress to strengthen the National Flood Insurance Program with improved mapping. You know, our neighbors out there, they need to know if they have the data and they understand the risk, they will be empowered. And in addition, there are a lot of folks who would like to purchase flood insurance, but they can't afford it. So we propose some new resources to help folks buy into the flood insurance risk pool. We need to expand that risk pool and strengthen that risk pool so that it's there when disasters occur. You know, mayors are uniquely situated in this climate fight. They deserve a strong federal partner. That's been lacking. So we want to, in addition to the National Adaptation Program, additional technical assistance, more resources for infrastructure. We want you to help set the plan. We want to empower communities just like they're doing in South Florida, as they just started in the Tampa Bay area with these resiliency planning efforts. We need to replicate that across the country and then have the resources flow, especially for communities that are on the front lines. So those are a few of the things. Go check it out at house.climatecrisis.gov. It's a long, comprehensive report. Give it to your engineers and technical folks, because we've got to adopt a lot of the recommendations into law. And you know what a tough slog that is here in Washington, D.C. So thanks for the opportunity to go over our new climate crisis action plan.
Okay, we have two folks from the audience who are standing by, ready to ask some questions. First is Jennifer Zero, President and CEO of the Association of Energy Services Professionals. Jennifer, are you there? Look at that, magic. There you are.
Hi, how are you? I have a question for all of the mayors. In your view, what can utilities do best to support your efforts to mitigate climate impacts as we enter hurricane season?
Maybe
You
you
gotta start down south and work your way north. I don't know. Go ahead.
All right, I'll start. So since we're like sort of the hurricane capital of the US, I think there's a few things. One of them is obviously embracing solar. I think FPM now has done a fairly good job of embracing solar as an alternative energy source. I think that their parent company, they produce the most solar of any utility company in the US, potentially in the world, but certainly in the US. And so that, by the way, that's not something that they always did. That they sort of came along begrudgingly. To their credit, they have now seen the wisdom in that. I think the second thing, obviously, is improving their infrastructure, particularly undergrounding. And undergrounding has two benefits. One of them is obviously that the infrastructure is not exposed. But the second benefit, which is another benefit for climate, is the fact that a lot of our energy infrastructure is in the front of homes, so you can't plant trees, and it affects our tree canopy significantly. So if we're able to get utility companies to underground the grid, then of course we can not only get a more stable grid that is less susceptible to shock, but also we can probably plant more trees, which creates more carbon neutrality.
Thank you.
So if we're moving up the interstate, up the turnpike to Orlando before we stop in Columbia, I'll go next. I'm probably in a little bit of a unique situation because we have a municipal utility, Orlando Utility Commission, as you know. So they're governed by a separate board, which I serve on. They're owned by the city of Orlando. We get a dividend and a franchise fee out of that, which is very helpful to our general fund. But it's a little easier to have partnership discussions with an entity that you own than it is an independent operator. So one of the most important things that OUC has done is adopt the same climate goals that the city has, and has changed their business practices to adapt to make sure that whatever we've set for 2030, 2040, and 2050 in terms of carbon emissions, net zero carbon by 2050, they're on board with producing that. Because if your utility is not on board, it's hard for a city by itself to move the needle if you don't have the utility. So they've adopted our goals, they're working towards them, and then probably the two big areas are solar, and they have committed to that in increasing the amount of solar produced. And they have some community farms, and actually we bought into a certain percentage of the first one they did, and we're able to power all of City Hall and the Amway Center with solar clean energy. And then the last part is electrification. They're partnering with our bus system, with the Expressway Authority, and with us in terms of electrifying our fleets, and also building out a very robust infrastructure for solar charging. I'm sorry, for electric charging.
All right, thank you.
Sure. And following the direction of most tropical storms and hurricanes, I'll close out. And just I'd say continue doing what you're doing. I think the coalition building that your organization represents, having folks from so many different sectors that oftentimes historically have been maybe even adversaries, sharing the gospel of energy efficiency, and understanding that we are all in this together. I think tag on what both of my colleagues have said, reiterating and amplifying municipal goals, since it seems like most of the leadership is coming from cities now, and also maybe recognizing the extraordinary time that we're in. Again, we're dealing with all these multiple mega issues at the very same time, but we're also seeing capital flow at a rate, at least, thankful to the Congresswoman and her colleagues for their leadership coming from DC, the understanding the importance of policy making and protecting, for example, the tax exemption of municipal bonds, the way in which we have delivered on several of these solutions that Buddy and Francis have talked about. And then also, you can just think 6 months ago, there's so many things that were facing the American people that we said that were all important, indeed existential, as we're talking about this one specific issue. that we all said we couldn't afford. These things were not affordable. We couldn't do them. But in time of crisis, we find the opportunity to do this. So we don't just need to think about what we're solving today in July of 2020, but use this as a window to also look forward. So I think constant advocacy, some of the work done around the EECBG, the block grants that have come to cities and local governments to help fuel locally driven and focused innovation. I think continuing to work together to try and facilitate that dialogue is so key and important.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Representative Castor, did you want to weigh in on any of that?
Well, I'll say we, in our action plan, we recommend that we no later than 2040 move the power sector to 100% net zero energy. And that's important for recalcitrant states like Florida that we don't have a clean energy standard. We don't have goals. We don't have energy efficiency goals. I see my good friend Susan Glickman, who's devoted her career to doing this. So if we establish a target of 2040 to decarbonize the power sector, that will push states like Florida into this century, and that will unleash enormous innovation and move us to clean energy jobs. The business model in Florida has been backwards. It's been how much energy you can use rather than how much we should conserve, and we've got to turn that around. We think our 2040 goal to decarbonize the power sector will help.
Great, thank
It's
you.
a beautiful segue to Susan Glickman, the Florida Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Go ahead, Susan.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your leadership. As Congresswoman Castor said, I've been at this for a long time, for 20 years, and Mayor Dyer, for someone like you who are out there 15 years ago, and others, it's exciting to hear what's going on. So we've already heard from the discussion today that communities like Miami, and I just learned a little more about Columbia, South Carolina, are already bearing enormous costs as a result of climate change. So my question is, do you think that major oil and gas companies, given that they've known about the climate science for a long time and led and funded really big PR campaigns to confuse it, do you think that they should be held accountable and bear some of the responsibility for some of the costs that your communities are seeing? And would you consider joining sort of the growing number of cities and counties and states that are filing lawsuits, cost recovery lawsuits? And would you consider that for your community? Because it's especially important for a just transition to protect our vulnerable communities.
I definitely would. I mean, I'm no stranger to suing large industries. I sued the big banks for discriminatory lending practices, and I sued the opioid manufacturers for things that were happening in our urban cities. And so I would certainly look at it as a very strong possibility. I don't know, with FPNL, you started to see them, and it's a little bit of a different model because obviously they rely heavily on nuclear power. But I think what you're seeing is that they're starting to learn that the value that they have, to the extent that they are trying to hold on to value and obviously be a going concern, is really more in their grid than it is necessarily in the way they generate power. At least because I think once their models, so is viability. Is just at an existential threat as our climate is, right? Because once once solar becomes as ubiquitous as it needs to be or should be, rooftop solar, particularly in a state like Florida, right? And you have batteries that are allow you to smooth over the spikes and the peaks and the valleys, and it becomes as inexpensive as we believe that it will be, right? It'll be like a household appliance, like having a refrigerator or having a microwave. I mean, there'll be nobody that will not have, I believe, in my lifetime, a rooftop solar and a battery, and it'll just be inexpensive because of economies of scale. And then, I think we'll be energy independent, and we will be relying on clean energy, and I think we'll be able to power our cars that way. And I've always said, I think we're 1 or 2 leases away from everybody owning an electric car. So, I think that revolution is upon us, that clean energy revolution is here. And, companies can either get on the bandwagon and figure it out and start trying to make it part of their business model, or they're going to go bankrupt. And it's that simple for me.
Yeah.
Mr. Dyer.
So would I join the lawsuit? I'd have to look and think about that. What I will say, though, is I look at this as both a crisis and an opportunity. And we're going to move forward. Mayors are going to move this country forward on the issue of climate change and what areas that we need to lead into. And I think what you're going to find is, how many climate mayors do we have? 400 and some number. We're not afraid to lead on this issue. When we pulled out of the Paris Accords, it was mayors that immediately stepped up and said, we'll adopt those goals. If the federal government's not going to do that, we will lead on that. So we're all affected by this. We're not in danger of sinking into the sea like Miami potentially is. We're a whole 90 feet above sea level, so that's not the major issue for us. But running on clean energy is absolutely important, and it is the other aspect. I like to tell people, we're not going to create any jobs here in Orlando digging up coal, right? So it's in our economic best interest to figure out those energy jobs that can be created with the sun and maybe the wind and battery power.
Agreed.
I can't speak to the congressman's background, but you got three former lawyers who've been trying not to practice law and be politicians on the municipal level the last several years. I do believe the position that you articulated, and I have to go back and look at my documents, is the official position of the United States Conference of Mayors policy that we advanced at least a few times over the last few years, that's passed close to unanimously. So there's our position. I'd be in the camp with my other two colleagues, obviously always open to litigation, particularly if it's something that inures to the benefit of the people that we represent, especially when it's against the backdrop of particularly egregious leadership. Just today, if you look at we have a very dramatically shifting sands of investor-owned utilities and our state's large publicly owned utility going on right now. The large public utility is probably about to be acquired by a Florida-based company. The former largest IOU in today's paper, their former president is pleaded guilty to fraud as they were building their largest nuclear plant. So there's no shortage of bad actors out there, okay? And obviously we have not been reticent about, as Francis mentioned, about standing up on behalf of the people, particularly when you're doing the right thing for the right reasons, but of course against the backdrop of limited resources. So we take one at a time. If there's some more formal dialogue we need to have on that point, being led by your organization, we'd be more than happy to have that.
I'd love to follow up with you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have some other questions from the audience. They're not in the green room. They won't pop up on the screen, but from Jennifer Roberts, director of Eco America's Path to Positive Communities, the former mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina. Her question is, what are the prospects that Congress will support future stimulus funding for job growth through a green recovery, including investments in grid modernization, which I guess goes to Representative Castor.
Yeah, well, the good news is at the end of June, after the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, after our action plan rolled out, just a few days later, the House of Representatives passed the Moving Forward Act, which is our 5-year transportation and infrastructure package. And already they were moving a number of our recommendations into law. So that bill will go to be negotiated with the US Senate, and there's a deadline of September 30th to get that transportation package rolling. And that includes a lot of a lot of dollars to help local communities and cities become more resilient. It's probably the greenest transportation infrastructure package ever passed by the Congress, but we'll see how it fares in the Senate. All of you can help by pushing your senators to take that up and move it through. Then I think, unfortunately, as we negotiate over the economic recovery package related to COVID-19, here's another area we could really use your help. As of now, you know, the House, we passed the HEROES Act a couple of months ago. That provides significant money to local communities and cities, and it expands the dollars provided to cities from the CARES Act. The U.S. Senate has now just announced what they would like in their package, and they have $0 proposed for cities and local communities. That's not right. And the mayors here have really taken up the charge to keep their communities safe. That's the bare minimum, because that money will allow them to keep on doing what they're doing on climate. Then unfortunately, I don't see any leadership out of this White House in moving a green stimulus. I think we intend, after the election in November, I think it's going to come down to the next president to craft that Build Back Better package that includes the major investment in the modern electric grid. You know, most renewable resources in America exist between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River, but the population is on the coast and outlying areas. We've got to build that modern grid to connect those renewable resources to the population centers.
Okay, so we have one final question. And the audio is okay. One final question, and wrap your final statement up in your answers to this final question. And it's a consensus question. It says, how are your cities engaging residents in the decision-making process as it relates to climate and clean energy programs, especially in vulnerable communities and communities of color? And we'll start with the mayor.
Who'd you start with, Tom?
Did you hear the question?
I heard the question. You faded out. I'll just answer. How about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, the feedback is pretty strong. No, it's so important that with all these issues we have fully engaged communities in this discussion. So often we have a dialogue, and usually the same citizens show up, those who care mostly about it. We have a moment now where so many of us are still at home where we can have a deeper dive in the community. We have a wonderful discussion just coming up on the 30th with our conservation voters of South Carolina, a wonderful film screen where we're going to talk about the issues of environmental justice. We're going to do a deep dive. I'll be tweeting about this a little bit later on, a deep dive in ways in which the community can get even that much more involved in helping shape the dialogue going forward. I will say that as my final comment, these difficult times in which we're living right now, we have a chance to turn this moment into a movement in which we have so many more of our citizens thoroughly engaged in the way that the Congresswoman and my two colleagues, we've been wanting more and more people actively engaged in the dialogue. So folks are paying attention to these issues of equity and justice and ways in which we build a healthier, stronger America that serves as a platform for human potential. This is our time to pull everyone in and decide how we're going to move forward together. So thank you very much.
Mayor Dyer.
Thank you, Tom. And again, thank you for the Climate Mayors hosting this. So when we started Greenworks Orlando, we engaged the community. We ended up with a task force of probably 80 very divergent interests and actually created a plan that had pillars, it had goals, and it had actions. We recently updated that plan 2 or 3 years ago to set the new goals, check the box on what we had accomplished during the course of that 10 years. But we have made sure that every aspect of our community is represented within the context of that. So we feel really good about the community engagement that we've had related to that. And we've approached this just about like everything else we do, you can't come to Orlando and talk to a business person, a government person, a faith-based person without hearing the word collaboration. And we value collaboration and think that the great things that we've been able to accomplish in the last decade have been largely because we've been willing to work together across party lines, across geographic boundaries for the good of our community.
Thank you, Mayor Suarez.
Thank you.
Unmuted.
Throughout our process of, can you hear me?
Yes.
Throughout our process of the Miami Forever Bond, we have engaged the public to design how we would spend and allocate the dollars. So it's been a very collaborative process. It also went to referendum, which is something I didn't mention. So it got sort of the ultimate democratic seal of approval. Miamians don't like to tax themselves. I would say probably most people don't like to tax themselves. But you know, it was fortunate timing because the Miami Forever Bond came on the heels of Hurricane Irma. And so I think people understood just how vulnerable we are and how important it is for us to make this investment so that we can protect our properties, so that we can protect our way of life and our quality of life. And so, you know, there has been a significant amount of public engagement. And frankly, it's going to have to continue because, you know, $200 million, while it sounds like a lot of money to some, it's a drop in the bucket in terms of what we need. And, you know, we definitely need state and federal support. So I'm glad that Congresswoman Castor's on the call. I mean, and I know she doesn't, I don't have to convince her, but, you know, there's, you know, we definitely need, you know, governments that have bigger checkbooks to help be co-partners in this process. And they have been historically throughout the history of the United States in large infrastructure projects. So we need their help so that we can deliver on the promise of Miami being here forever.
And Representative Castor, you get the last word.
Well, just as these mayors have demonstrated, the way you're successful and you build equitable communities is that you listen and you make sure that all of your decisions that you make, you're consulting along the way. And that's what the federal government has to do. In fact, in our climate crisis action plan, we spent a year listening to environmental justice communities all across the country, to tribal communities, indigenous communities. And our plan is built upon the foundation of environmental justice. And what that means is it's embedded in everything we do. When we are determining where clean energy, distributed energy grants are going to go, we're going to start in EJ communities. When we are trying to determine a permitting decision by EPA, there has to be consultation with the communities. For the communities that don't have the resources, we want to partner with you and help you build those resources through an environmental justice fund. And it's not just EPA, and it's every agency in the federal government. It was, you know, we delayed the rollout of our climate blueprint when COVID hit. Then, after the murder of George Floyd, people were protesting in the streets. It's an awakening to environmental injustice and racial inequality across America. And now is the time. People are awake to it, and they expect their leaders to act upon it. And you watch, working in collaboration, we're going to get there. And it kind of reminds me we're all saddened by the loss of John Lewis, where, you know, up here it's been a very sad week coming back here. And I think, you know, just keep him in mind, because he always encouraged everyone on to march forward and to do it with good spirit and big hearts. So that's what we have to do.
Okay, well, we've ended almost on time, which is a massive achievement. And I want to thank the panelists and everyone who took the time to watch this today. And I hope you learned something, and stay safe. Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.
God bless y'all.